So, here we are with Diane Ring at Boston College Law School. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
I was very pleased you were able to join us today.
My pleasure, absolutely.
So tell us, remind me of your exact sort of position and focus here at BC Law School.
Well, I'm a professor here at Boston College Law School, and I focus primarily in tax, as you know. And my written work has really been devoted substantially to international tax and really related issues coming out of that. So that's where I've been spending my time in the past couple of years.
Right. Okay, now tell me, I took a few minutes last night between, one thing and another, and went over your latest article, The Role of Tax Sovereignty in Shaping Tax Cooperation. And I guess that primarily in the current fight against tax havens or unfair tax competition, harmful tax competition. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think actually to really understand the sort of goal of that paper and really the question, as you know, many of the issues that countries are facing in international tax, including in particularly the question of tax competition and the role of havens, those problems are ones that countries realize they can't address on their own. And any steps that they took unilaterally would be temporary and probably not successful. So there's been a number of moves in the OECD's really action starting in 1998 was really the first step in showing this idea of trying to get countries together on a subject. But over the past 10 to 11 years, as that process has been underway, there's been sort of a constant undercurrent of commentary and discussion on the subject of sovereignty.
Right.
We can't participate in this, we don't want to take this step, or the actions of the OECD are harmful because they're all against the sovereignty of the nation state.
Okay, the OECD is no more than a bunch of sovereigns coming together to talk about what they might want to do together. Right. Okay. And the U.S., I guess, has come and gone, blown hot and cold.
Exactly
with Bush
right.
administration was sort of pro-competition, pro-havens and reducing tax rates, right?
Before 2001, the U.S. was fairly strongly on board with the OECD's efforts to work towards limiting certain kinds of tax competition and responding to tax havens in a somewhat unified manner. Coming into 2001, from February really through May to June, you saw a continuing sort of set of comments and suggestions coming out of the U.S. from the change in administration that they were a little more hesitant, a little more concerned, and eventually, by May, a fairly strong statement, we're not on board, essentially, with the OECD. That did ultimately sort of backtrack again, so the U.S. is involved definitely in this, but it also played a major role, I think, in somewhat changing the direction of the OECD's work on tax competition. And sovereignty was a piece, really, of how that was described. Now, many would argue whether there's real sovereignty concerns or is it a faux concern that they have.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, now? Take Hong Kong, for example. It used to be a British colony. The British gave them their tax law, was purely territorial, very low rate. So, say an American tax lawyer would think, oh, that's a tax haven, because you can base a company there, have an office there, but as long as the profits are arising outside Hong Kong, there's no tax. But the sovereign state was really the UK. Now, of course, it's part of China, and you see, as at the G20 meeting in London, Hu Jintao and Sarkozy getting into a fight about it, and Obama kind of taking them into a corner, knocking their heads together and saying, let's just, not have a fight about this.
No, it's a very interesting. I mean, one of the points you raise about havens and sort of their link historically over time to a number of sort of the major economic powers. I mean, they sort of did come into place, these havens, and had certain relationships that gave them both low tax rates and some measure of infrastructure and relationship that allowed them to be logical places to sort of bring your money for a period of time. But I do think we're starting to see some shift in that, and the sort of over the past year and a half, the increasing rise of exchange of information agreements as an example, it's interesting to see where that will head. Certainly it's a step we haven't seen in the past. Whether it's meaningful, I think really the OECD is taking a look at that now more seriously to think about are these changes that both the havens and many of their former sort of relationship countries, whether that's going to be meaningful and what would make it so.
Okay, well it looks like exchange of information has become almost non-controversial.
which is
motherhood,
one of the
it's apple pie.
I was just as a side. That's really, if you'd gone to 1998 and said exchange of information is going to be the future, I'm not sure that that really would have been what people would have foreseen. That almost what you said, apple pie is just a given. You see countries just acceding to it, at least on paper.
Right.
I don't think that's what you would have guessed in 1998, and that really is something that kind of came out of the changing U.S. position, sort of backtracking from the path the OECD had, coming back in, and the reshaping the OECD took in terms of saying the problem really is about information. And for a variety of reasons, it all kind of coming together.
So do you see? So where do you see this going? Sarkozy and I guess Gordon Brown recently said, we've got to have sanctions ready by next spring for any country that doesn't go along with exchange of information. Well, it looks like they all will go along.
Well, what does go along mean? Right? So does go along mean I'm going to sign an agreement with your country? Does go along mean that I'm going to institute within my own country a series of record collection procedures that I haven't in the past? Do I have the infrastructure? Do I have the resources and the money? Let's imagine I want to. Right. Can I do that by next year in any realistic manner? Maybe yes, maybe no.
Right.
And then do I really want to? And once I have the data, is it in a form that's accessible to you, my treaty partner? And the questions just go on.
Right. Now, let's turn to there's something in your paper I wanted to ask you about. You talk about sovereign states. You talk about the need for cooperation. There's the theory of cosmopolitan. You talk about whether there's inter-nation equity. Is that something that sort of makes sense in the current framework of international politics and nation states? And then cosmopolitanism is this kind of almost idealistic idea that individuals are of equal value everywhere, and that nations kind of should fall away, and world government will come someday based on just all the people of the world. Now, you, I think, obviously are correct in saying that that's currently implausible to think of many. You can think of many situations where governments would not be willing to share their extra revenues with their enemy, who are people they currently perceive as enemies. However, there was one comment in a footnote that I wanted to ask you about, where you said that this is not only implausible, you said it's likely not even desirable. And I wondered, without any explanation.
So that's a little venture into political philosophy. And what I was really hinting at or referring to there is sort of saying, first I've made the observation, is it plausible, et cetera. But even if it were, is it a goal we should be striving towards? If we thought in 15, 20, 100 years we could be there, is that where we should be really envisioning the future? And I raised the question that maybe not, and really sort of, it comes from this sort of background concern that you do see in political philosophy about what does it really mean to have, say, a single government where there's sort of no other, there's no outside, there's no constraint, there's no place to go, and in a sense you're likely funneling power up to the top if you really mean it, as opposed to, say, a collection of states. You could say the UN, we could imagine at the top, but really all the states are still quite independent. I'm taking cosmopolitanism and that ideal at its true sort of ultimate conclusion, where you have a single world government, and you really are capturing power at the top, and there is no other, unless we imagine by that point we sort of founded life on other planets, and so we're talking about that as the option. But there's a real political concern about having that much power, I think, located in a single structure, and that's really what I was hinting at.
Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you, the definition of tax haven. The OECD definition, which everybody else uses, includes both exchange of information, or lack of exchange of information, and lack of transparency. What do they mean by transparency as opposed to exchange of information?
I think in that context, and sometimes you'll actually find, I think, in conversation or other kinds of speech context, they might be combined or blurred a little bit. But I think really what they're getting at in that context is that it's clear what the rules of the country are. It's understood what the tax rules are going to be, how they will be applied. They'll be applied to everyone. It's not a situation where you really go in and negotiate your own deal.
Yeah, make the deal over coffee down at the local
It's quite transparent. If you set up a company here, if you engage in these actions, have these sales, have these expenses, we would know what your tax
predictability.
And so really that's, I think, the focus of the transparency factor.
Okay. All right. Just to